Energy insecurity is everywhere these days. ESG capital constraints in investing have shunned fossil fuel and nuclear energy. Global risks are spiking. Stay tuned for today's episode of Truth in ESG with leading energy expert Dr. Anas Alhajji. I am Mark Neuman, CIO of Constrained Capital and creator of the ESG Orphans Index, the ETF ORFN. I am with renowned keynote speaker, author, and energy expert, Dr. Anas Alhajji. Dr. Alhajji has taught at university. He has consulted with governments, companies, and financial institutions in the energy space. We are very lucky to have Dr. Anas Alhajji here today. Welcome, Dr. Alhajji.
Hi, Mark. Thank you.
So we don't have a ton of time, but I definitely want to capitalize on all that we have. ESG has resulted in big funds divesting from fossil fuel and nuclear energy. How do you believe this has contributed to the current energy crisis?
Well, one of the problems, and this is going to sound funny, because for those who are really worried about the carbon footprint, those who are worried about the environment, those who are worried about climate change, they just handed their assets to someone who does not care. So how they care about the climate if they are handing their assets to someone who does not care? That's the funny part. But the serious part is we need a lot of capital to grow oil production, to grow natural gas production, to expand energy supplies, whether for the grid or anything else, to build nuclear plants. And by shying away from it, we don't have enough capital. And the problem is they are affecting others, and the banks are not providing the money. Therefore, we are not going to have enough supply to meet the demand. But we do have another problem, because everyone who is on the climate change side and they are asking the government to do more, they are forgetting one fact, that we have thousands of books and articles and interviews, etc., with top experts for the last 100 years talking about government policy failure. And they assume 100% policy success. That contradicts history and contradicts everything we know and contradicts logic. And therefore, they are not counting for the impact of the government policy failure when it comes to climate change policies, which means by default that the demand for oil, gas, and coal and power is going to be way higher than current predictions. And we don't have enough investment because of the divestment. So how we are going to meet future demand? There's going to be a crisis.
Understood. So changing gears a little bit here, you meet with many investors and energy interests. What would you say are some common misconceptions that ESG investors have currently?
There are too many. And one of them, of course, assuming the government success and full success in its policies. Their idea that an intermittent energy source is going to fulfill the shoes of a 24/7 energy source, a sort that comes that not energy intensive or intense to replace a very intense or an energy source with very high density. But there are other issues too, because if we look at the long-term forecasts, all the long-term forecasts basically are biased in one way or the other. For example, if you take the IEA, all the forecasts of the IEA reflect the government wishes. And who are those governments? Are the members who are paying the employees and the salaries of the IEA. They cannot go against the masters who are paying them. And they are not going to tell them that your wishes cannot be applied or what you are saying is wrong. So we are taking the wishes and assuming this is what's going to happen on the ground, and that's a big mistake.
Let's talk about the supply and demand of oil and gas. As you mentioned, the IEA. What do you think is the sort of supply and demand outlook, and which of those two do you think is more important in discussing the sort of future of oil and gas?
We have two problems. In the first segment, in the first question, we talked about the decline in investment, mostly because of the ESG. Of course, there were other reasons too, like the decline in oil prices and the decline in natural gas prices, etc., and the government push toward the greener economy. So we have an investment issue. We don't have enough investment to meet future demand. But this is not the big deal. The big deal is that The failure of some of the green policies means by default higher demand for oil, natural gas, and coal, and power, of course. And we don't have, I mean, look at what California announced today. Today, they are urging Californians not to charge their electric vehicles. They are asking them to conserve energy. That's today. So we don't have even enough power. So the idea here is the failure of those policies in the future is going to create an additional demand that's not counted for, and no one is counting for. So we have already a gap between supply and demand, which means that the supply is lower than demand because of lack of investment. But on the other side, because demand is going to be way higher, then the gap is going to be larger. And therefore, there is a big opportunity to make money in the fossil fuel business and in nuclear.
Fantastic. That's a great transition there. You mentioned nuclear. Before we wrap it up here, I wanted to hear your views on nuclear as a complement or a supplement to the fossil fuel space in terms of how it looks for the future.
If you are a believer that fossil fuel is a limited amount and you believe in peak oil or peak gas or whatever on the supply side, then there is no other solution but nuclear. If you don't believe in it and you believe that fossil fuel is pollutant, then you have to go for nuclear. So any way you look at it, on either side, you need nuclear. And even forget about Europe and the United States. We definitely need more nuclear in those. And we already have in crisis right now. We know what the crisis is, and we know we need more nuclear. But even look at other countries. Today, for example, in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia is the largest exporter of oil in the world. Saudi Arabia cannot survive in the coming decades without nuclear. They do need nuclear. The population is booming. The economy is booming. And if they don't go nuclear, then their oil exports, their gas exports in the future are going to decline, and therefore their main revenues are going to disappear. So they need nuclear. You look at a country like Egypt, where the population is going through the roof and the economy is booming. The same story. They need nuclear. Places like Algeria and Morocco, they need nuclear. So this is a global issue and cannot be solved based on what we see today by solar and wind alone. And it's not enough. The fact is, we do need all sources of energy. So we are not siding with one side against the other. We do need all sources of energy. But the problem with ESG is going the other way. And that other way is going to cause death and destruction, and is going to cause recessions, etc., all kind of problems. So that's why we need all other sources of energy to cover those gaps in the future.
As one quick follow-on, Dr. Alhajji, please discuss the German situation with nuclear and how it impacted and affected things in the EU and what we saw transpire in the beginning half of this year.
German nuclear is all about domestic politics within Germany. Historically, since the late 60s, early 70s, we've seen demonstrations against nuclear and continued throughout. And when the left won the elections, they decided to end nuclear. So they put a time limit on it, which is 32 years at that time. The conservatives opposed that. So when the conservatives won in 1999, they decided to change it. So they give extensions. They had 18 reactors at that time. They gave extensions to 10 for 14 years, and the other 8 got a 7-year extension. And then we ended up with 2011 Fukushima disaster, and all of a sudden the conservatives flipped. Within 3 days, Angela Merkel basically decided to close several nuclear plants and decided on a phase out by 2022. And they started this plan. What's strange is conservatives who were pushing for nuclear, all of a sudden they flipped. And it turns out the reason why they flipped, because they had elections 3 days later, and the Green Party was winning, and Angela Merkel basically panicked. So the closure of the nuclear reactors, while it sounds like a reaction to Fukushima, it wasn't. It was trying really to stay in power in Germany. So all of a sudden we have everyone aligned basically with small difference, because the left wants to end the nuclear power while the conservatives want to phase it out. So both of them want to end it, but both of them want it because the polls in Germany show that the majority of Germans want to end dependence on nuclear. And that shows you the power of ESG media on those people. Now they are paying the highest prices in the world for energy, and they are suffering. We don't know what's going to happen to them in the winter, but all of it because of the massive misinformation campaign that's being waged by the left media in Germany. And that's why the Germans, when they voted for phasing out nuclear, we are seeing now a reaction, and a lot of people asking to extend it, and some people are saying it has to be part of the energy mix.
So that brings our episode 1 to a conclusion. I want to thank Dr. Alhajji for his invaluable expertise. I'm Mark Neuman, the Constrained Capital founder and CIO, sponsor of ORFN. And make sure you tune in for episode 2, where we talk about the ESG veil being lifted and the damage done to society and investors, and how the ESG industry is currently digging in their heels to try to keep the ESG movement going, much to the detriment of society.
Thanks, Mark.